Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Michael Woods, founder of Inclusive Sport Design, and welcome to the Sport is for Everybody podcast, where we talk all things inclusion with amazing guests who are out there making it happen. We are recording on beautiful Gundungurra country. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Gundungurra people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also pay my respects and welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and all other Indigenous and First Nations peoples who are watching or listening in. Today, I'm with Sunaina Jaswal to learn how she goes about her work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion leader in sport. Now, Sunaina is a 2025 Deakin Young Alumni Award finalist and is a sports management professional focused on expanding opportunities for women, girls, and underrepresented groups. Currently, the diversity, equity, and inclusion manager at Surf Lifesaving Queensland. She's also worked with Tennis Australia and Tennis Queensland as well. Sunaina moved from India to Australia in 2015 and holds a master's in sports management from Deakin University and a Bachelor in Sociology. Her expertise spans sports development, gender equity, and even event management, with experience at major events like the Australian Open and the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. Today, we talk about her role as a DEI professional in both tennis and surf lifesaving, hear a little bit about her journey coming to Australia from India. We'll also talk about the value of mentors and allies in the work that we do as DEI practitioners. And we'll also, as usual, go through the quickfire questions and we'll get Sunaina's best inclusion tip at the end. So make sure you stick around for that. Alrighty, let's get into it. Sunaina Jaswal, welcome to the Sport is for Everybody podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to get on with the session. Thanks for having me, Michael.
No worries. I've been looking forward to this one. But before we get into it, do you want to just let us know what First Nations lands you're dialing in from?
I'd just like to acknowledge the First Nations peoples on the land that I'm on, the Yugambeh peoples, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present.
Now, I want to preface our chat today with, I guess, a bit of context as to how we know each other and how we came to be connected. So I guess for our listeners at home, over the last, almost 2 years now, Inclusive Sport Design has been working with Surf Lifesaving Australia on some broad diversity, equity, inclusion strategy work, as well as some adaptive and disability competition pathway development work. And so that's been a really great, I guess, long-term project that we've been involved with. And Sunaina is part of the Surf Lifesaving community, which you would have heard from the intro. And so we connected through that work and she's doing amazing things. And that's why we wanted to get her onto the podcast today. But we'll get into Sunaina's work shortly. But I want to go back to the start. Tell us about your journey to Australia. What's that story about where you've come from and how you came to be here?
It's a long story, so I'm going to try to keep it as short as I can. But so growing up, I grew up in the northeast of India, which is my father basically works in the tea plantations in Assam and manages a couple of estates. I think I was always lucky having that support of being involved in sport. So, when you have a family that's involved or they're golfers and tennis players in the family, I think that got passed down to me very quickly. And I think it was then, right through school, I went to a boarding school in India called the Assam Valley School, went on to do my bachelor's again in sociology in India, in New Delhi, where right throughout the journey, I was very involved in playing sport. I think I did realize that there was a little bit of a gap once I finished my school and then once I finished my undergraduate degree that I, went and amazing, I guess, experience of being involved in it, but there weren't enough opportunities for me to actually pursue it. And I, at that time, didn't really know what pathways that I even had that I could explore to actually stay involved if I'm not the next Serena Williams. So I think it was, if it's not on court, there's no off court. It was almost like that journey of saying, there's so many opportunities that I can now start researching and looking at. So once I finished my bachelor's, it was a good, I think, 3 years that I did, or 4 years actually, that I worked in corporate communications with, one of India's biggest multiplex chains. So I was always involved in the corporate world, but my heart always laid, I wish I could put this skill set into something that's aligned to what's going to keep me waking up really excited every morning. And that's when I did a bit of research around, where can I go to explore opportunities and pathways in doing a master's degree in sport management. I really wanted to build that skill set. I think when you move to another country, there's also doing a degree really helps you understand the landscape and I guess how that industry works, because it's very different back in India.
Yeah.
India is more private. Here it's more, there's a line to federal, state government and bodies, that support it. So that's when I think it was in 2015, there were a couple of choices I had and I narrowed down to Australia. And my mother was like, you couldn't have chosen a further place to go. But
The
yeah,
furthest,
the
the furthest
furthest
possible
away,
option.
2 oceans across. But it was, I'm so glad. Like, I have no regrets on that journey. But did a master business from 2015 to 2017 at Deakin University in Melbourne. And I don't think at that point I really realized the power of my theoretical knowledge that I had, a bachelor's in sociology. And when I started doing my master's, I really started putting the two together, because sociology was around, a lot around, especially what I specialize in now, around gender studies. And life's taken one full circle where both my degrees kind of merged. And that was when I started my journey in Australia.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what a privilege to be able to make that choice and to, kind of pack up and head to a whole nother country to chase your sporting dream. Like, isn't that
Yeah,
that's such
it was
a cool story and opportunity to have.
quite a step, but we're here.
Yeah, that's right. And so I'm interested now in terms of, that step into the diversity and inclusion in sport world. Like, you started in corporate communications and, obviously you're training in sociology and things like that. So you're obviously interested in people.
100%.
And so how does that translate? Or what was that catalyst that moved you into the sort of DEI space after your study, or maybe that happened during study?
I think it happened when I started working in tennis. Like, I always had an interest, and when I started my role, so yes, I worked in corporate communication. When I finished university, it was challenging to get a full-time job, especially because I didn't have all the volunteering experience, as well as, the things that you traditionally look at in the resume, but not realizing that someone's migrated. And it's different in different countries, but it kind of worked out for the best, because I started working in events as well. So major events like the Commonwealth Games, and I would thrive on that as well. So that was quite an experience. And when I first landed my first job, that was with Tennis Queensland. I went on to then work for Tennis, both Queensland and Australia, for 5 years. But one of my first jobs was a tennis development officer role. So I would manage my region. So I started off with the Southwest, which is more regional Queensland, Toowoomba and beyond, all the way up to Roma, Quilpie, all those regions. And then had 2 years on the Gold Coast as well. But I think what I realized when I was doing that role, and for anyone listening and starting a career, I think those development roles in sport are so important, because it gives you a taste of and an understanding of how different parts of the business run. So, I was managing the region, but I was working with members, with club development, with facilities development, with grants and funding, with inclusion initiatives, with community partners there as well. I always found that, my heart just lay when I had a day when I was doing something, a program for young women, or an event where we were partnering with, say, our First Nations community, and at that time with SWIN, which is Southwest Indigenous Network. Like, I'll come back and I would just have this sense of, I want to do more in this and I really want to make a difference. But as an officer, like a development officer, you've also got your focus on how do you support your clubs to become more sustainable and build the membership. And every time you would look at that data, I'm someone who really likes to analyze that, because it really reiterates what we need to do more. And you would see low participation of young girls, and this is right across sport, and just asking myself why, and what aren't we doing enough to retain them. And then that's when Tennis Australia actually was successful in getting funding from the Australian Sport Commission, and there were new roles created for dedicated roles around women and girls. And that was I have to do this because I really want to make a difference. And that's when I started specializing in gender equity. And from there, broaden that into diversity, equity, and inclusion a lot more once I started with Surf Lifesaving Queensland.
Yeah. What a journey. It's so good that to find a passion in sport in general, but then to find the sort of motivation and joy in engaging with people who would otherwise face challenges to get involved in sport. Like
Yeah.
I totally get the sense of, I guess, gratification and motivation for getting out of bed every morning to go and do that work. So
Sad.
I'm glad you're doing it. We're going to talk a little bit more about the work you're doing now at Surf Life, but before we get into that, I'm interested to know whether your kind of migrant experience, your relocation experience from India to Australia, and kind of the cultural perspectives that brings for you. How much does that have an influence or play out in the work that you do, or if at all?
A lot, because and that's a really good question. I think it definitely does because we keep, as working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we keep talking about lived experiences. And I think I'm putting a lot of my journey into it, the transition of moving into a new country, starting from scratch, not having the support system like your family or even within the industry of having allies or mentors, and you're literally starting everything of, and even at the same time, you're also trying to understand the difference in culture, lifestyle,
Yeah,
and there's a lot that comes at you all at once, and you almost have to compartmentalize it. And I think right through my journey, there have been some people who've really guided me and supported me, whether it was in organizational roles, well, whether it was just something someone has said to me in a conversation. And I think I look at that and say, we really need more of that. We need more people creating those pathways or even sharing information with people who come into the country for the first time. And now there's so many more opportunities with workshops and things like that. But I feel like when I did start in university as well, even though it was an emotional journey, but exciting at the same time because you're
yeah,
finally doing what you want to do. I think the whole university experience was great for me because I feel like I've got a lot more open in my mindset because it's very multicultural in the university landscape, especially with Deakin.
yeah,
Got people from diverse backgrounds, which actually allowed me also to understand my friends from Australia a lot better over those 2 years. And like how you get
yeah.
integrated into whether you're playing team sport. And even though tennis is my first choice of sport that I always played growing up, I was coaching a little bit as a part-time job when I was in university, but then I chose to move into a team sport, which is football that I play with, and I still call it football. So for the viewers who are Australian, I'm not moving that to soccer. But I think,
That's okay. I'm with you on that one.
thank
Football's
you.
my sport too, and
Uh,
I'm sticking with the F
we're
word.
sticking with football. I think it makes you a lot more resilient, and you
Yeah,
just I think get to a point where you realize that not everyone has the same experiences, even if you move from the same country, and that's why lived
yeah,
experiences of each individual is so important. And I also through the journey, like without I think divulging too much, there were a lot of one-on-one experiences with people, or there were certain moments on stereotyping, or there was certain unconscious bias that you
yeah,
encountered. And for me, it all the more makes it, I want to make it easier for not just people from, culturally and linguistically diverse communities, but people who are just underrepresented as a whole, or people with disabilities who don't have those pathways. I think it's so important to be able to encourage, and women in sport, for me, that's a big one, to ask
yeah.
themselves why, why are you here? What are you doing? And yes, so to answer your question, definitely, I think my journey has played a major role in that's my why, I guess, to what I do
Yeah,
in with.
yeah. And look, there's a lesson in there for sport administrators, decision makers, recruiters, right? Like if recruiters looking for new people to come into key sport roles, whatever type of role it is, if they come with that, that preconceived expectation that someone should be coming through the Australian sporting system in the ways that people do, they start in clubland, do volunteering work, they go get some
Yeah.
qualifications, and they come into a job. What an opportunity lost if they were to overlook someone like you, right? who can brings a different perspective to sport, but also brings a really rich cultural experience and an open-mindedness and things that just brings another approach to the work that happens, whether it's in a DEI role or it's in another role in sport. So anyone out there recruiting at the moment, take notes. Don't think outside the box and don't assume that someone's journey that's not the standard one isn't of value, because it absolutely can be. So I want to jump into your work now. So, and actually I want to preface this with sort of mentioning, at the time of this recording, the National Sports Strategy's been released just a few weeks ago, I think. And central to the new national strategy is called Sport Horizon. I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, Sunaina, but in the game plan for this strategy, I guess, diversity, equity, inclusion is highlighted as a guiding principle. And inclusion is highlighted as a key priority in terms of the strategy. And then in terms of, measurements and measuring success of this national sports strategy, they're looking at measuring things around whether or not everybody has a place to play or a place to be in sport. And so right now at the national level, we've got this really clear directive around the role of diversity, equity, inclusion, and the value of that, and also the fact that we need to measure the impacts and outcomes of that. So that sort of lays a bit of context for where we're at in the sporting sector here in Australia at the moment. And so, of course, Sunaina, your role is diversity, equity, and inclusion manager at Surf Lifesaving Queensland. So can you just share a little bit about what Surf Lifesaving is, because we've got international listeners potentially in landlocked nations as well, for whom surf lifesaving may be a foreign concept, and more specifically your role. What's the scope of your role?
Yeah, so I think just pointing out with what you just said about the national strategy, I think someone who works in DE&I, I think it's fabulous to have that alignment coming through. I think the broader vision of where we all are all heading, no matter which organization we're in, but just to have this vision for our industry as a whole. So that's fabulous. I have a little bit of reading to do as well to catch up with the details in that. But aligned to my role, so Surf Lifesaving Queensland is a state organization in Queensland that does the most important job of keeping our beaches and our visitors and our community safe when they're on the beach. I think our primary role is saving lives, and we have an amazing community of people that have a really rich tradition and a history as an organization. We've got about 35,000 members. In Surf Lifesaving Queensland itself, we've got probably about 400 staff, as sole, casual, and full-time. But what I'm getting to is just an amazing number of people that come out every day, show up every day, and basically make a difference in keeping our Queensland beaches and communities safe. And I'm absolutely honored to have that opportunity. I come from a sporting background, and now self-sport is one part of the business, but it's an amazing business where there's so many other verticals that I'm actually getting to work in and collaborate with different departments. So we've got life-saving, we've got focus on our members. As an organization, we're also an RTO. So we've got an education team and amazing facilitators, that train in first aid and CPR and so much more, and sport. So I think my role, so I came in at the end of last, it's already been a year as we speak. She's gone by really quickly, but it was the first of its kind in any self-life-saving organization across the country, where it's amazing that we had that investment into a dedicated diversity, equity, and inclusion role, with the primary focus of looking at where we are at as an organization, also keeping where we've come from and where we're heading and what we want to achieve. So in March earlier this year, we developed our first ever diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. Because it's the first time we're doing it, for me as a professional, it was very important to have something where everyone understands. We spoke about the national strategy coming from the government, and that's the vision for all. So for our organization, when it's so big, it was important to have a vision for all. And now we're collaborating with our community partners to build on that strategy and have 5 different action plans for underrepresented groups within our organization. And that's the journey of its own as we go on with it. My role is mainly statewide engagement. You're working with different departments. We have 6 branches, so we've got different regions, and you're working with club committees and regional staff as well. And the most interesting thing that I found is that there is no one size that fits all, which is the beauty of it. So if you go far up north, the focus is a lot around, engaging with First Nations communities and our community partners like Clontarf and, we got Harbour Mentoring, and there's so many people doing an amazing job there, not barrier the same. And then what I've noticed with Southeast Queensland clubs is, the need for support when it comes to accessibility, and especially because it goes
Yeah.
beyond our members. It goes into, you have tourists and you've got so many people coming down to the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast from all across, I guess, the world. But it's just ensuring that we we address the barriers that are there, and also ensure that the guides or the guidelines, especially what we've been working towards, and you've helped SNSA develop, I think just having sustainable, outcomes for what we're going to do. And I think whether that's through your partnerships, whether that's through your resources, whether that's a big one for the role that I do, you know, do one thing, but do it well and ensure it's sustainable for long term. And also looking at ensuring that we also address systemic change, especially when you talk about,
Yeah.
the history and then where you're heading right across sport. It's important to work on the things that will matter 20 years from now. And it's not just about a program here and a program there, but just really going beyond that. And obviously providing those opportunities
Yeah.
of initiatives, at the same time looking at systemic change and really ensuring that it's really ingrained in your organization right across the business. So that's been an amazing 1 year because I've had so many people reach out, share their feedback, and we're still powering through and doing what needs to be done and working
Still
through it.
powering on.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned like some of the complexities of the surf lifesaving kind of, we call it the movement, right? And for context, surf lifesaving in Australia is the largest volunteering movement in the world, right? And so that's significant in itself. But there's a significant amount of complexity, both in terms of what you do. You mentioned that the organization is a registered training organization, an RTO that does training and certifications. It's also a sport organization that does competitive surf sports. It's also a volunteering organization that's focused on saving lives on the beach. And they're federated structures. You've got local community clubs that are run by volunteers. You've got, branch level organizations that are mostly volunteers, some of them paid. You've got your state level, you've got a national level organization as well. Like that's a really complicated, not a mess, but it's a really complicated environment to be operating in. And then throwing in objectives around diversity, equity, inclusion. How do you capture that and address that in your strategy that you've just mentioned that you've launched your state level DEI strategy? How do you address all of that complexity and still keep things, as you say, kind of, focus on the one thing, get it done?
Yes.
How do you keep
Yes.
it simple enough that people can engage with it while still dealing with the complexities of the surf life-saving environment, which is pretty unique?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think, as I said before, do a few things and do it well. So the
Yeah.
strategy is a 3-year strategy, and realistically, there's only that much we can achieve in 3 years' time. And then you assess where you've gotten, and then you add in more things with where we get to in 2027. So I think the primary focus of what we are trying to achieve out of the strategy, we want to reflect the communities that we serve. And our leadership, our board, our CEO, they're all they've all led this space when it comes to, we have one vision, and it's about putting that vision in front of, I guess, everyone involved in our organization. And it's also, I think, it's also understanding the demographics of where we are at the moment, and if you look at Queensland in itself, let's say about nearly 20% of Queenslanders come from, different countries, to over 220 countries. And they're projecting for that to go even more when it comes to, migration into the States. So our core business is saving lives, having volunteers, ensuring that we have the the trained professionals on the beaches to do that. And I try to look at the logic behind this, and this is what even our leaders in the organization always focus on, that we need to provide, this large portion of our, I guess, population, the support and the awareness so that we're actually, by the end of it, being able to do what we need to do, which is save lives and ensure that even if people are not certified lifesavers, they still know they understand the beach and they're aware of it. So I think that was just one example of one of our key, I guess, priority communities. But the main thing is whatever we do, and you can see that in our strategy, is we need that demonstrated commitment. Because as you said, like we've got a lot of committees, we've got amazing leaders, and we need that from them. We also need that demonstrated commitment across partnerships, right across the business. We're looking at visibility. My favorite quote by Miriam Elman is, "You cannot do what you cannot see." So we have, even prior to me coming on board, like there have been so many amazing members in clubs doing what they need to do to make our organization inclusive. So it may be our first strategy, but it's not the first time that clubs are doing or, have programs like inclusive nipper programs or adaptive nipper programs, or, they've actually got councils and private businesses donating and supporting with beach wheelchairs to improve accessibility at beaches. So I think it's also, the strategy also focuses a lot on sharing that best practice. How do we actually bring in the feedback of people who've been involved in self a lot longer than I have, and really work with the experiences that they've had in their environment to then ensure that we get to what I spoke about is the sustainable outcomes, have an approach to addressing the existing barriers in a way where we're bringing everyone along on the journey. So I think that,
Yeah.
and the big one where we always talk about is the monitoring and evaluation bit, and reporting on
Yeah, well,
that.
that was going to be my follow-up question is how what are the success measures in a strategy like this, and yeah, how are you measuring
Yeah,
that?
I think like as we develop our action plans, I think we're breaking it down a lot more. But I think with our membership is a big one. We want to be able to track that, and we've got a system to be able to do that. We've gone out to clubs. So recently, one of the examples of measuring that would be our accessible, organization survey, just understanding where are our clubs at when it comes to beach access. And it was made about a majority of clubs coming back to us with their responses. But that information is also really good for us to have available for people to plan if they have a disability, to plan before they come to those clubs. So it's
Yeah.
to collecting that data, and especially now that we're starting, us also identifying the gaps in our current systems of collating information and data with where do we need to work on to include something in a membership form, or so I think just that's definitely something that we're looking at. Women in leadership roles, that's a big one that we're working on. So we've got nearly 50% of our members in Queensland are females. And then when you look at leadership positions, there are less than 33% in club leadership roles. And then when you go into club president roles, that's that's about 11 to 12% as club president. So that right there is a key. Those are our measures of where do we want to get to can we set ourselves some, realistic targets. But also when I say realistic, I think it's also, you cannot force inclusion. So we need to allow ourselves the time and the process and awareness and building training and getting more male allies on board that would tap a woman on the shoulder and bring her through that journey. So we're working through those as our, I guess, monitoring and evaluation and keeping track of where we are
Yeah.
and where we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta have that, or else you don't know what you've
100%.
achieved. I'm interested as well in terms of, and I know you've only been at the organization for a year or so, but even maybe with your experience at tennis, when it comes to getting core diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy in place within an organization, what's the sort of stuff that you think makes a difference in terms of getting towards success? From your role position, is it leadership? Is it buy-in? Is it money? What are
All
the
of it.
success
No.
factors there?
See,
Yeah.
I think the core one, and it's in our strategy as well, is the leadership. I think
Mm.
I've worked in a couple of organizations, and I commend like the leadership of where I'm at the moment with Surf Lifesaving Queensland to really drive this. Because it sets, I know we've set a vision, but you have to, and actually our president always says this, we need to walk the talk. And he always says that in a meeting with us. And I think that is something that when I look at, I'm like, your leadership is essential. Then you've got a lot of things that I'm just going to pick up the key ones for me, but I think collaboration is extremely important. Yes, we've got a strategy, but how are we going to actually implement it? How are we going to reflect the communities that we serve? And that comes from your community engagement and your community partners, getting feedback from, let's say, people with lived experiences, from community leaders. If I'm looking at engaging more multicultural people in our organization, but I really need to address, go out to the community leaders and ask them what the feedback has been. So I think that collaboration piece, and not just with external partners, but I think for me, especially with my role, is collaborating with every part of the business, whether that's HR, procurement, life-saving, membership, education. So as you can imagine, it's been a very busy year, but a very fruitful one. And I think building awareness, and that's a big one where as we go along, our targets or whether we want to achieve our priorities that we have in there, you almost have, and I always say this, you've got people who are in different, I guess, different levels of their own inclusion journey. It's about bringing people along, but it's also about building awareness at those different levels and continuing to do so. So whether that's for our staff who are, key when it comes to daily conversations, regional staff, especially with clubs. And so, yeah, collaboration, bringing people along, ensuring you've got lived experiences, awareness and sustainability with your policies and your procedures. You can have all of that, but you don't have systems in place to set what is acceptable, and then ensuring that you do all of it and do it well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of moving pieces. And you mentioned that collaboration as being really key. How do you go about engaging with the stakeholders in general, but also how did you engage them in the strategy process? Because like you say, it's quite a complex network of stakeholders in Surf Life and internal and external to the organization as well. So how do you go about that work?
So we've had a number of, how's it called, the touch points with members and with the community. And even prior to me joining, there was a lot of work that Surf Lifesaving Queensland had done to get feedback through focus groups around diversity, equity, and inclusion, surveys and things like that within the community. One of the examples would be bringing in, prior to my time, Michelle Redfern, who was like an external consultant who actually worked with a number of women in the organization to understand the barriers, the past behaviors, and the need for, and also addressing why aren't there enough women in leadership roles. So that was one piece that really went into, the learnings from our whole report was a very solid ground for, setting the vision, because that is what people have come back to us with, and this is what we need more. And especially with disability inclusion as well, that's also been, especially because we've had inclusive nippers in our organization for a long time. So there's been a lot of feedback coming through to the organization within that as well. So now as we go along working on our action plans, which is very specific to the priority communities, it's about engaging with those community partners. So, we've got First Nations consultants, so we partner with organizations we had Get Skilled Access, for example, supporting us with, they have staff with lived experiences, they've got connections with, and also having conversations as people with lived experiences with our members in identifying what, through focus groups that we did, our surveys, to do a complete desktop review of where we are at as an organization. And for example, you do a review of your policies and procedures and identify the gaps that currently exist. So I think everything from desktop reviews to surveys, and I think we do survey our clubs a lot, a little more than they like, but I think it's so important to have that information, because that really allows me to not recreate the wheel in my role, to
Yeah.
acknowledge the work that's been done and understand what's been done and provide people, clubs, leaders, or even people with lived experiences with what we need. And I know we have a lot more to do, but it's a start. And I think engaging people, just you have to engage people. You really have to listen, take that feedback in, and ensure that your plans and your strategies or your frameworks are aligned to the needs of the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that. In terms of people and engaging them, have you faced any challenges in getting people on board with the idea of inclusion in the organization? Have there been any roadblocks along the way?
Yeah, well, as I said before, I think it was a lot easier for me to come in and do what I had to do because that had, it was my role was endorsed by the board and the leadership. So
Yeah, there's some groundwork
people
there
knew it's
already.
coming. There was a lot of groundwork. I think with anything that we do, we say diversity is like, big part of creativity and you can get so much out of it because people come there with different perspectives, which is a
Yeah.
positive. That same thing can be the challenge and the negative. So I think because everyone's in that different part of their journey or understanding and awareness, there are definitely challenges every time you do something when it comes to inclusion. And it's about, how do you manage those challenges or conversations? I always say you cannot force people to be inclusive also because we need to understand that all of us, no matter where we come from, are influenced by so many different factors in our lives. So that could be from where I grew up. Maybe you and I could have more similarities than I possibly would with someone from my own family back home, because those could be the secondary factor. But I think it's about normalizing that. And I try to do that. I try to do that in conversations that we have but by the end of it, I think no matter how many different views and values and principles that we have as individuals, by the end of it, there's one thing that binds us together is the organization that you're working for and the organization vision. So through those challenging conversations, it's always bringing it back to what are we here? What are we trying to do? And, how is this diverse, this diversity in our membership actually going to support the core business of what we do? And when you simplify that and, when you provide people with the tools to understand that, it goes beyond, you from this place or you have this ability or, this is how you identify. And so, yes, there are challenges, but I feel like it's how we as practitioners or professionals actually approach those challenges and just have that conversation.
Yeah.
In my time, whether that was in tennis, whether that was moving countries, you know, there's been, there's not a single conversation that I may have to leave a conversation where I say, okay, this is overwhelming. Let's revisit this later. But there's not been a single time where someone's not met me with just understanding that, oh, this is my point of view and this is yours. And I feel like that is the first step to inclusion, where you're allowing yourselves to be in one space and having a respectful conversation about different views that you've been brought up with. So there's challenges
Yeah.
remain, but I think we've just got to focus back into why we all are in that room in the first place, to do something which is literally the same outcome that we all want for the organizations that we respectively work for.
Yeah. I think sometimes we forget that ultimately what we're doing is we're talking about people and dealing with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And and sometimes we get caught up in the policy or the compliance or the
Yeah.
legality side of this work or the programmatic stuff. And at the end of the day, we're really talking about trying to find common ground with other humans and find
Yeah.
ways to make people feel safe and like they can create a space of belonging no matter who they are. And yeah, I think sometimes we got to remind ourselves that it's just people.
Yes. Yeah.
it's
100%.
what it's all about at the end of the day. I'm gonna take a little sidestep here and pick your brain a little bit around some of the things that you see as being a bit of a gap or a knowledge gap in the sporting system at the moment around DEI and from your sort of tennis experience and from surf life and sort of beyond. Is there any key knowledge gaps or capability gaps that you're seeing in the sport and recreation and even the broader volunteering sector that's front of mind? Or
I think just the biggest one is understanding the why. Like, I think it's just around, and
Mm,
I just speak about demographics. And I think the more you understand the why, like, it could just leave the organizations out of it. But even if you look at it as a club, that is, take an example of, like, if struggling to, let's say in regional Queensland or somewhere, struggling to have enough members to just keep the club going, or even people picking up their hands to be a part of like committees, and that happens, and we've known that right across sport, that volunteering has changed from the time of what it was to what it is now. So I think
yeah.
when you start asking the question around why and the how, like, in terms of how is this going to help, I think not just our club, but also people getting involved. That awareness is really important, because you look at the demographic around you, and if you see, oh my gosh, like I've got like a majority of people around this community who are like Indians or Asians, and I have two members in my club who are from the community. So that's your why. Like, why you should be doing it in the first place is because you want your organization or club or to be sustainable. The other one is the how to, because it very it's overwhelming, because these are new discussions. It's overwhelming also because you don't understand the why, and you just think it's ticking the box, or you think that this is something that, oh, now we're being forced to do. But I think when you understand the
Yeah.
why, you start understanding the how. And I acknowledge that it is stretched resources, so it almost feels like there's additional people that you need, and we don't have that. But I think it's about at least asking the members, it's at least asking the community or volunteering organizations of, would they like to partner? And it's just exploring it. Once you start exploring it, there's so many people who want to get involved or who want to share that expertise. So I think that awareness is extremely important. Understand, the why about it. Also understand that, you know, I think stereotyping, unconscious bias is often seen as something that, oh, I don't have that, like, or it's always almost seen as
Yeah.
a conversation that people don't want to talk about. But I think we should like acknowledge that, and also celebrate the times when people come out of that or have that awareness of what it is, and just normalize that conversation. I love sitting down and having like a conversation with people where they're like, oh, but this is what I think. And I'm like, oh, but this is the other side of it. And I think it's such a productive space to be in. So I think those are important questions, obviously, along with just having the
Hmm.
ample resources and guidelines we can provide. But in order to not make that overwhelming and, enjoy that reading process, I think if you understand how this is all going to help and come together, like with everything that we do, you need an end goal to, you have that understanding
Yeah.
of what your end goal is to anything in life. So,
Yeah, totally. And sort of an extension of that question, where do you see diversity and inclusion work? Where do you see it at right now in Australia in the sporting and volunteering sector? Are we heading in the right direction? Do we have enough resources? Do we have the right people? I mean, we've mentioned we've got this new national sports strategy that's got DEI and
yeah.
inclusion sort of as core elements to it. But in your view, where are we at? Are we heading in the right direction?
No, great question. I think from at least when I started the work, there are a lot of people realizing the value of it. So, you may see that and say people could be from a community perspective. There's also been a lot of background work happening. I think I've probably been working in this for nearly a decade, but there's also been this, funding and grant opportunities. So I think now it's all coming to a point where it's getting a bit more strategic than it was before, because where I've seen maybe it's not been sustainable is, you've got these amazing grant and funding opportunities to run a program or to run an activation, but you run that till the time you have the funding, and then there's no accountability, there's no pathway, there's nothing leading on. So I feel like there's a lot more focus on that with, and you spoke about the strategy coming out. There was the AUC's gender equity policy, which is actually
Mhm.
setting the tone of what it needs to look. like in state and national organization. So yes, a little bit more alignment, and it's, but I think it's moved from the afterthought, oh, I'm doing this because I have to do this, to how do we bring this in? Even the work that you're doing with this, and I say, oh, with what I'm trying to achieve in Queensland, it's across the organization as a whole. So, yes, you're working on the adaptive program, but you've also got a major amount of work with developing guidelines and policies that would allow for that change to be, I guess, just like a blanket approach for everyone, which is important. I still think it's very overwhelming with the amount of information out there. I still think there is a lot of
Yeah.
resources. I still think there are a lot of workshops and a lot of and that's something for us as professionals to look at, because when I said I want to do more in this, we started looking at what would be the right thing. I think I have good mindset. And, we get by and we learn, but it's then a lot. There's a lot of information out there that makes it a lot harder with which is the right fit. So I think
Yeah.
we need to
Yeah.
simplify that a lot. It's on people like
Yeah.
us to do it. You
Yeah.
can't do
I think I
everything.
agree.
Yeah, you can't do everything.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think, I think one of the gaps that I had seen probably over the last sort of 10 years was sort of a waning of this cohesive national direction. Whereas now I think
No
we're
way.
getting that back now
Yeah.
with the various strategic documents and approaches from federal government, filtering down to state government approaches, and then also with the Sports Commission and the various initiatives that are coming out. And I can see that those things are starting to become more aligned and more enabling of each other, which is really good, because it then gives people like yourself and others working in the DEI roles within sports the direction and guidance and frameworks that they need to be effective in their roles and know where, what they need to be implementing. Where I think the gap is right in that space that you mentioned around
So much.
there's so much
Yeah.
stuff out there, right? And so that creates a problem in execution. So being able to execute on those objectives and those targets and those commitments that organizations are making can still be very challenging at the moment, because either you don't know how to go about doing that yet, if you don't have access to the support and resources for that, or there is so many options and so many places you can go. And particularly in the disability space, there's plenty of partners. The LGBT space as well is, there's multiple directions and partners and engagements and products and programs and training
A
platforms
lot.
and things that you could be engaging
You're
with.
so
And it's
right.
hard to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. And like we talk about intersectionality so much, like, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I still see policies and like information coming down, which is, separate. So that, we're talking about
Yeah.
intersectionality, but that approach is still separate also because funding is still separate. And,
Mhm.
like the opportunities. Yeah. So there's, again, like, you can do as much as you can do from an organization wide approach, but I hope we have the answers to that in a couple of years. How do we simplify these? But this is why,
Yeah.
to everyone starting out on their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, you do need people who understand, I guess, or specialize, or I think it's really important to have direction,
Yeah.
because, you can do so much, but as a professional, I would say pick a few things and do it well. Assess when you've reached the end of the 3 years or 4 years or whatever your timeline is, and then a reboot with your other, extended
Yeah.
priorities. So again, like I
Yeah.
think
You
having
can't do all things all at once.
100%.
Yeah. We're nearly kind of coming to our end, and we're going to jump into our quickfire questions. But before we do, I want to ask you a question that we sort of spoke about offline around the value and importance of the allies and, I guess, mentors and supporters for people like us who do the work, who
Yeah.
do this work. And you kind of mentioned that there's been some key people and moments that have really had a significant influence and impact on kind of your career and life trajectory and things like that. So you don't need to name names, but
Good.
tell us about those allies and like why that's important and how
Yeah.
it's helped you.
I think just with everyone listening, we have done in sport mentoring really well in the past. Yeah, I feel we continue to, which is more one-on-one, where the person and you're working through that. Where we are, especially with inclusion, where we are working towards is having more people who do not necessarily belong to underrepresented. Like, Michael, you're a perfect ally because, you may not come from a multicultural community, but you are an ally for, I guess, everyone, irrespective of their background, through the work that you're doing, which makes a massive difference. So, and, you do that by using your voice and, with your experience and advocating for it. So, uh, I always start with that because I feel like there's almost a lot of conversations that I've had with like, oh yeah, I mentor. And that's very different because that's very personal. You mostly know the person. It's made a massive impact because at the start, and maybe this ties in well, I did speak about, when you move to a new country, you're starting from scratch, you are trying to build your network because let's face it, in reality, you could have an amazing resume, but at the end of it, if you don't have the right networks, it's almost twice more challenging to get a role or get into the industry. And so for me, it was building that. And I remember when I moved from Melbourne, when I finished off, moved to Queensland, and I was on the Gold Coast, I saw the Women's Sport Australia mentoring program. And back then, Carol Fox, who was also previously on the board for Surf Lifesaving Queensland, but she was the president of Women's Sport Australia at that time. And this is years ago. And I actually went for that workshop and so happened that there weren't too many people there for that session. And it became really weird because it almost became like, her talking to me and understanding where I am. And I don't I know many years later when I did meet her, I was like, I don't even think you remember this, but after that meeting, you got me in touch with a woman named Lauren Penny, who was into events in sport. And all she did was made a connection and sent us an email and connected us together. And Lauren, till date, I'm friends with her. I've seen her have 2 kids now. She's been my mentor throughout my probably 10 years now in sport. But how I said I started in events and she was an amazing mentor at that point to me. But through the course of it, there have been so many people who've acted as whatever you would like to call it, but that allyship piece of just supporting someone, or it doesn't have to be hours spent sitting down with someone and having a coffee and telling them what they need to do in their lives. Let mentoring handle that. But just connecting people or giving a piece of advice or speaking up for them when they're not in the room to represent themselves, I think that makes so much difference. And as leaders, where we are now, I think my wife for today, or what I do is, just now that I'm in that position to be able to do it, I want to make that difference for people. So yes, that did change the trajectory of my life because I, through Lauren, then connected with a lot of people. And through her time, and I've met Carol through a lot of women's events, and with how effortlessly and graciously she's always, you know, encouraged me within the industry and, cheered me on when I've spoken at the Queensland Sport Conference and she's in the audience. And it's the small things. And even when I worked in tennis, now that I'm working in Surf Lifesaving Queensland, it's for everyone listening, your ally could be any person. It could be someone who just backs the work that you're doing, or, just with, I've had people who supported me on different things in different times in my life. It could be within tennis, it could be understanding policies. And I had different people and they're all a part of my journey now. And
Yeah.
I keep in touch with every single one of them because maybe they don't realize it, but I take the time to thank them and point it out with how much difference they've made in my life. So if you could do that, and people can do that for someone else, especially people who don't have a voice or who are not feeling confident enough to say it, maybe a young girl at your local club, maybe someone who comes to the beach and is on a wheelchair and struggles to get the support that they require in that moment, or even someone who can't speak in English that clearly and, still wants to be involved. So how can you create that environment for them where they feel like they belong? And I think that's us making a difference every day. So it's important.
Yeah, it just comes back to people, right? Like people helping people to do the
People
things they
helping
want to do in
people.
life.
Yeah, just being
It's pretty simple, hey
great
guys.
human.
That's it. Yeah, thanks for sharing all of that. I really appreciate it. And you mentioned sort of, the value that someone can bring to your life. You've brought an immense amount of value to the conversation today, and I'm sure
Yeah.
there's going to be at least one person who's listening in today and going, "Oh, yes, you've just given me the confidence to go after the thing that I need to go after, whether it's in the DEI or in sport role or something other than that." I'm sure that's happening at the moment. So, and we'll help our listeners connect with you at the end of our chat, but it's time for our quickfire questions to round out our conversations today. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Alrighty. So the first one's pretty easy. Who's your favorite athlete?
Too many, but I'm going to go all-time favorites, David Beckham and Steffi Graf.
Bex. And Steffi Graf. All right, cool. One from both of your sport passion worlds.
There we go.
Awesome. All right, follow-up one. Who's your favorite team right now?
As always, Manchester United. That hasn't changed. I didn't have a choice, by the way. I know this is rough, but this was literally like my dad followed Manchester United. I had to, and now, once a fan, always a fan.
I understand. Well, when the Gunners come up against United, we'll have to sit down and have a watch.
It's true.
All right, the next one. What's your greatest sporting achievement? This could be off the court or on the court. Could be a tennis one. Could be a football one. It could be in work. What's your favorite?
Probably your board.
What's your greatest sporting achievement?
On the court would be playing 2 junior national tournaments back in India. 2. I didn't make it very far, but that was amazing. And
well done.
Off the court, working at the Australian Open. I can't, because I grew up, I just can't get over the fact that I worked in it not once, not twice, but so many times. But yeah.
Yeah.
A highlight.
Yeah, the AO is an amazing spectacle of sport. That's so amazing. Yeah, that's a good one. All right, a little bit more personal. What's the first thing you do when you get up in the morning?
Coffee. I go straight for my coffee machine and hug my dog.
Not tea? Surely it's got to be tea.
It was before I moved to Australia, and my first stop in Australia was Melbourne, so my dad's tea just went right out of the window, and now it's just coffee.
Straight out the window. Awesome. I love that. Yeah, you and everybody else I ever interview, coffee is the top of the list. So, all right, now this is the last one, the most important one. I hope you've thought about this. What is your best inclusion tip for our listeners? You've shared a heap, but what's your number one top inclusion tip?
I'm going to go top 3 really quickly. I'm going to say listen to other people's perspectives, be open to other people's perspectives, and be kind to each other. Be a good human.
Be a good human, yes. Always comes back to that. It's a simple proposition.
It's the right thing.
Simple proposition. Also, thank you very much for that. Really appreciate you joining us on the Sporties for Everybody podcast today. Do you want to share with our listeners how they can connect with you, get in touch with you, follow your work? Do you want to share some contacts with us?
Yeah, most certainly. For anyone wanting to reach out, have a chat, whatever that may be, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've got my full name, Sunaina Jaswal, and you'll find me. Drop me a message there, or you can even follow my website. And I've started blogging. I do know I need to blog a lot more, but that's sunainajaswal.com. Yeah, if you head in there, I'll probably be pressured to blog a lot more and take time out to do what I enjoy doing. So yeah, LinkedIn or the website.
Awesome. You'll have to start a podcast too.
Oh, that would be fun. That would be fun, but you do it really well, Michael. I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, when I find the time. We'll drop all those links here in the show notes as usual. And so for our listeners at home, also don't forget to head over to inclusivesportdesign.com can get a whole bunch of free resources as well as access all our services and training, etc. You can also join the ISD community and our mailing list and get free tips directly into your inbox every week. Now, as usual, we'll pop the transcript of our chat today as well as all of the details for the show notes, and that'll be available on isd.com as well, and we'll publish across all of the various platforms. Speaking of which, please make sure you hit subscribe on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. That helps us get the word out to more people. And if you could also give us a rating on whatever platform you're on as well, that would be amazing. It helps the message go further. So that's it for our chat. Sunaina Jaswal, thanks for making inclusion happen. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thanks for having me again. That was so much fun.